Okay, so now we're moving on to our next discussion. It's field notes of the urban composter, and we're going to be going live to Omved Gardens, where Joe and Vicky have been doing some unbelievable work on, well, all kinds of things, from growing to composting to food waste solutions. And they've been doing a lot of research too, and not forgetting Sonia. I don't know if Sonia's presenting today, but hi to Joe and Vicky, and looks like Omved Gardens is a bit cloudy. How are we doing at home field?
A little bit cloudy, but it's bright as usual. It's a lovely white background here.
Brilliant. So, okay, so we've moved on from the waste laboratory. How have you found the first few sessions, Joe and Vicky? Any points to make before you move into your urban composting field notes?
Yeah, super inspiring. I think I'm very inspired by Tom Hunt, always. I didn't know anything about the roots of a leek, and that's quite a good alternative.
Definitely going to try that, because we grow our own leeks, so we get a lot of surplus fruit like you don't get in the supermarkets. That would be lovely. Where is Sonia today? Is she
in Scotland?
Hey, you're there, Scotland. I was going to call you Scotland. Hey, Sonia.
So maybe I'll do a quick introduction.
Yes, please.
All right. So my name's Sonia, and I assist in managing the Omved Seed Saving Network at Omved Gardens in North London. We're a network of over 300 growers across the UK. We provide heritage and organic seeds to growers of all abilities, growing in all kinds of spaces, and provide growing support every step of the way. I believe Jen has just put up a poll about your personal access to composting, so it would be great if you could fill that out. And so I'm going to pass it over to my friends Joe and Vicky over at Omved to introduce themselves.
So I'm Joe. I'm the chief preserver and fermenter here at Omved, and I grow food as well. And I'm also a zero waste chef. So I make sure there's a close link between the garden and the kitchen, and make sure that we compost what we can't be eaten, and we preserve or ferment foods. And if we have a big quantity like apples or pumpkins or tomatoes. So yeah, that's what I'm doing here.
So education is key. So yeah, lots of educational videos, like Sonia said, for growing and waste, stopping food waste as well. My name is Vicky, and I am the head gardener here at Omved Gardens, working with obviously lots and lots of different types of food, but also saving seed from that food for our seed saving network, and composting everything we possibly can, because compost is the very basis for any good and successful garden.
So I think we can have the presentation slides on, please. Oh,
the poll's going. Poll's going nicely already.
Hi, Sonia. The poll results shared. So if you just want to go over these, and then I can share your presentation.
Perfect. So about 34% of you said that you compost all your food waste through local council facilities. 28% said the local government does not offer composting facilities, which is very interesting. We'll be talking about that later. A huge proportion of you compost your own food waste, which is awesome. And some of you have access to composting facilities, but do not utilize them. So that's really interesting. And we'll be talking about sort of all these different aspects of it throughout our session. So just to preface this, I'm not a composting expert. This was a case study we conducted to explore how we can better deal with our food waste at the Omved Garden Hub and also in the surrounding community near us. So it might not be a comprehensive overview of the issue, but I hope we can highlight a few things that will be of use to you. Would you mind changing the slide? So the first thing we're going to talk about is council composting variability and challenges. So just to start off, like I said, Omved Gardens is based in North London, sort of at the junction of three boroughs. And so the three boroughs are Camden, Haringey, and Islington, and all of which have food waste pickup as part of their wider waste program. So as part of their general waste and recycling, they also gather food waste. However, you can see that there's a variability in how that food waste is collected, who collects it, and how the program is managed. So for example, in Camden and Islington, if you live in a building above a shop, there's no option for you. Sorry, in Haringey, there's no, Islington and Camden do not gather from if you live above a shop. And there's no rewards programs for residents in Islington, but there is in Camden, and there sort of is in Haringey. And this is just to highlight the variations. This is a very small geographical area in a single city, and yet this process is not streamlined at all. And in fact, when you move into a flat or a home, you won't know about composting unless you're interested, or if you seek it out. A bin is not provided. You have to request it from, in Camden and Haringey, you have to request it directly from Veolia, which is a transnational private company. So I just wanted to sort of frame what we're looking at. And so building on that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Joe, who will further explore the barriers and solutions to the issue of urban composting.
So next slide, thank you. So basically, so we've found 4 main obstacles to food waste progress, which are educational, psychological, and mainly due to infrastructure and council challenges. So the first one is basically educational, because there's extremely low awareness about the importance and the need for recycling food waste. And basically the councils have very poor communication methods with residents. There's sometimes barely only one flyer through the letterbox once a year to talk about it. And also usually residents have to request a food caddy rather than getting one as standard, which means people don't bother doing it. And you can see that in other countries, if you don't recycle, you get fined, and they literally check your bins, but we'll talk about it a bit later. The second impediment to progress is psychological. We have a big disgust factor here. People find it gross to have a bin full of just food waste. The bag leaks and the bin smells. It's inconvenient. It's not pleasant in your flat. So you just don't see why you would do it. And also, I think an important point is that bins are ugly. They're not stylish, and it doesn't really make the action of recycling your food waste appealing. And then the third one is about the infrastructure. So the infrastructure space in urban areas are logistically difficult for recycling facilities to be implemented locally, especially in big cities like London, Manchester, Birmingham, where roads are very old, and the flats have been built like a very long time ago, and they're designed in a way there's no room for recycling areas, and usually roads are quite small for big lorries. And obviously, in order to reduce carbon emission, you don't want transportation to take over, so it needs facilities to be close by, and you want to use green energy vehicles, otherwise there's no point really. And like Sonia mentioned, there's in big cities like London, we have lots of blocks of flats and flats above shops, which are a whole different issue, because the food waste is usually not collected because of pests and rats, and mainly other people dumping waste in communal food waste bins. And finally, a big challenge comes from the councils. So usually they can't afford to pay for caddies or compostable bin bags for everyone. And basically, it's very costly for council to provide separate food waste collection, largely because they have to buy a special fleet of refuse collection vehicles, and they have to hire extra drivers. And usually the contractors like Veolia, they charge a council upfront for the lifetime of the vehicle, which can lock them for a very, very long time. We can go up to 14 years contract. And part of the issue is also apparently councils don't have a budget for waste. It usually falls under the general budget. So that makes it very difficult for them, because they have to choose between waste and things like social care, for example, which is a very difficult call to make. And yeah, it's basically extremely expensive per household in the current form. And if you can put this quite brutally, I think for them, it's much cheaper and easier to collect all in one bag and send it to the incineration and I have the argument that it'll just generate electricity or ash to make roads. So yeah, that's all of the negative, if we can say it like that. So next slide, please. But it's not only impossible. There's some actions and measures taken by some pretty amazing people and organizations and charities and local authorities who are fighting food waste locally in cities, in countryside. And also the general public are starting to wake up to, which is extremely important. So next slide, please. Yeah, so the catalyst for change is here. So obviously we're not part of the European Union anymore, but there's a big pressure from the EU Commission that is requesting every country to prepare a report and proposal by end of 2023 to basically set up a European-wide food waste reduction target to be met by 2030. So it brings a lot of pressure on all of the countries, and it also puts a lot of pressure on even if we're not part of the UK of the European Union, the UK is still has a lot of pressure. So therefore, cities and council, they have legally they have to offer food waste solution, basically. And like Ellis from Olio has said, the lockdown, we've seen some food waste reduced by 20%. So people are cooking more at home, and obviously there's less waste in your bin, less food waste. So that's a very big, important fact today. And there's a lot of different local actions and teaching programs like Love Food Hate Waste, where people are teaching consumers about food waste and provides them with some helpful portioning and planning tips. There's some people, it's based on like what we found. We're curious about this subject, but there's so many things happening in the background. I'm not going to list them all because it's a lot, but just give you an understanding of what's happening. There's also some people growing mushroom from surplus food. There's lots of surplus catering business companies and lots of communities accepting of food waste, and garden communities accepting the neighbors' food compost. So yeah, there's a lot of things happening in the background, and also big technologies solutions happening as well. There's a lot of research and investment happening with big companies and businesses, mainly to use sustainable technologies as solution to tackle food waste globally. So you can use some people think of using AI to quantify waste in the bin in commercial kitchen and also in individual kitchens. So next slide, please. So we also have found some pretty amazing, inspiring countries. So Sonia is going to talk about Quebec.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about the issues around urban composting, but we want to highlight that it's definitely possible because other places have done it, both on a regional level, a country level, a citywide level. It's totally possible. So Quebec is a massive province in Canada, and they have allocated 1.2 billion Canadian dollars over the course of 10 years to combat food waste. So their goal is to provide composting service to all citizens. And I just want to think about that for a second, because it is a very sparsely populated province. People are really spread out. And so the logistics of that are complicated, and putting forth that political will and community buy-in is really important through that process. They also hope to manage composting in all industries, so both businesses and institutions by 2025. So government, institutions, schools, all private businesses. And this is part of their larger goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 270,000 tons per year by 2030. So they've put in place this long-term plan. They have concrete goals they want to reach. And again, like I said, there's political will and community buy-in, which are two of the most important things you need to create a large-scale plan for combating food waste. Next slide, please. Joe, you want to take this one?
Yeah, and then so we have the Nordic countries like Denmark, where basically Stop Wasting Food movement has achieved a large number of results in collaboration with the Danish government. They managed to rescue 300 plus tons of surplus food since for the last 10 years, basically. So they're very, very big, and also like they work closely with the government, which is extremely important here. And the next slide, please. And the last big country, well, not the last, there's quite a lot of them, but South Korea is standing out here. They went from recycling 2% of food waste to over 95% in the last few years. They basically introduced smart bins, which is essentially a little cover for your wheel bin that you have to tap in with a kind of a card to identify and unlock the bin. So then you tip your waste and it weighs it, and then it charges you for it. So you pay a lot less for recycling than wasting. And yeah, so basically in Seoul, the pay as you recycle machines have reduced food waste in the city by 47,000 tons in 6 years, which is enormous. So next slide, please. So what does that mean for the UK? It is seriously possible to implement a consistent way or consistent ways to avoid all of the current challenges we have in this country. The starting point is literally to harass your local council for solutions here. And then, if you can, put more pressure on the government to offer basically food collection for places who don't have it. So, because if the government rolls out more budget, then it might be easier. And basically, our government should force to charge individual with fines, like in South Korea. I know it sounds quite dreamy, but this is how it should be, just charging on an individual scale. And then the ideal and potential idea that someone mentioned to me will be to build a smart bin attachment for people at home. So by measuring the weight of all of the waste to give you a clear picture of the split between the recycling and the waste, and how much we waste each month, year, basically similar to what we have with the smart meters with gas and electricity. And the hope is basically to simply seeing and quantifying the amount of waste we create. And it might make us think twice about things. And also studies have proven that some of the most effective ways to get people to cut down on energy consumption is by comparing ourselves with our neighbors. We're pretty tribal by nature, so we don't want to do things that makes us stand out. For example, wasting more food than others. So it would be interesting to experiment with whether comparison changes people's behavior as well. And if we can demonstrate this on a smaller scale, maybe it's something the government would be willing to try on a larger scale. But yeah, there's as individuals, there's numerous and various composting methods. You can simply start at home, like your food waste caddy. But Vicky will talk about the practicality of food waste composting and how we make it work here at Omved Gardens.
Oh. Hi everyone. Yes, so we're thinking about how, we're talking to lots of chefs here, and we've got some amazing ideas about how you can reuse bits of veg that would normally go to waste. However, I had a little talk with Joe, and I was like, I quite like a little bit of food waste because I get to make compost with it, and compost is the black gold that makes a garden and makes it fertile, makes it able to grow things. So if you can compost at home, do it. By all means. We have, I'm not going to run you down to the garden right now, but we have a 3-tier composting system where we have undigested food in one. What's going on?
I think you can go back to, the full screen.
Where are we?
This is basically, well, quickly we can go through this. We will send some we have a nice toolkit that we will share on our platforms afterwards.
We're flipping all over the place here. What's going on? So I'm going to continue with compost, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay. So we have a 3-tier compost system where the undigested food goes in one. You dig off the undigested stuff. You get the good stuff from underneath, and you put it into the next one. It has a second time to kind of like digest a bit, and then finally you get a third really, really clear, really, really nice fine compost. But that's a really big space. It takes up about 3 or 4 square meters of our garden. And if you don't have that kind of space, we are today looking at ways that you can make compost at home, or even just in the kitchen without a garden at all. So we've got 2 nice little contraptions here. One is a bokashi bin, which uses a fermented grain to basically ferment your food into a safe compostable block. And then the other is a wormery. We just filmed a tutorial of how to make your own wormery, and it is on our social media, on our website, on our Seed Saving Network website, I believe. And I'm going to talk you through these 2 pieces of equipment, and how they can help in your kitchen. As you can see, they're quite small. You can tuck them away in a cupboard. You can also buy really, really stylish ones that look really sleek, and you wouldn't know what they were. They look kind of like very artistic. However, they can be quite expensive. So as we were looking to buy a bokashi bin, we were looking between 60 and 120 pounds for a stylish one. So we thought, let's try and make our own. So first I'm going to talk you through wormery stuff. So this is, like I said, one that we made earlier. Wormeries use lots and lots of worms. There's actually not any worms in here yet. Some of you might be pleased to hear. We use lots and lots of worms to digest our kitchen waste. So all it is a layer of mesh in the bottom to stop worms from falling through. A tap. I've layered it with some cardboard that happily says nice bum on it, because I thought that was funny. And that's to stop the worms falling through. And then you simply put food waste in. Oh, I feel heat on that already. So this is a collection of bits of food waste. Got some tea stuff here. I throw tissues as well. A lot of people don't realise that you can compost tissues. So as long as you haven't used them to wipe up anything gross, you can compost your tissues if it's for food waste. And then all you do is you chuck in a handful of worms and you let them do their magic. They also, the great thing about worms is they also create worm juice. So that's what the little taps here is for. Can you see my finger there? Yeah, I think you can. And they create worm juice, which is a really, really densely nutritious liquid that you can feed to your houseplants. You dilute it in about 1 part worm juice to 3 parts water, and you can use it to feed your plants. So it's great stuff. And yes, you can make your own. You can also buy bigger ones that are for the garden. It's entirely up to you. And then, by the way, you can also, I said make your own bokashi. This part of the wormery, just this bottom bit, is basically a bokashi bin. I think I bought these for about £7 each on the internet, but you can also use recycled like tubs from cafes. They often set up these round tubs that you get like mayonnaise and all kinds of sauces in. And if you go and get 2 of the same size, you can make your own at home by just buying all these inexpensive little taps. I think that cost me £2. So actually, you can buy these really, really cheap and make them at home. Then the next thing we have here is a little bokashi bin. That's quite sweet, really. Bokashi is an interesting thing because it uses fermented some kind of bran, so that it's again a waste product. So when they take the bran, the outer shell off of a grain, they inoculate the grain bran with the bacteria, and it makes bokashi. So basically, for bokashi, the reason I extra love bokashi is that you can compost anything. So cooked chicken bones, you can do cheese, you can do cakes, you can do bread, you can do veg peelings. Everything can go in a bokashi, and it's so easy to use. At the bottom, just like the wormery that I showed you, there's like a bit of mesh to stop food falling through and blocking up the tap. But it's literally simply a case of throwing in things like a few ripped up egg boxes for a bit of carbon. So when you're composting at home, you must have a mix of carbon and nitrogen. Nitrogen tends to be stuff like food scraps, like leaves and carrot peelings, potato peelings, whereas carbon is brown stuff, which in the garden would be in the form of leaves and straw. but in the kitchen can be in the form of tissues and egg boxes. And that's just to soak up a bit of the juice and make a nicer environment for things, for good bacteria to thrive. So all you do is you layer up your food waste with tissues and whatnot, and put a scoop of bokashi bran over it, and it really doesn't smell. It's quite a cool thing. It ends up being a really solid block. You use a camping tool to push it down. You can also line it with a caddy liner, because as Joe mentioned before, a lot of people kind of squeamish about composting at home because of smells and things. However, it just doesn't smell. The fermentation process makes it smell kind of like, maybe a little bit like alcohol, which is not that bad. So that is bokashi, that is wormery. Positives of bokashi. Positives are you can compost pretty much anything, including cooked chicken bones and things like that. Negatives are you have to buy bokashi bran. I have seen some tutorials on how to make it, but it looks quite tricky and you still need to buy bran anyway. But you have to buy bokashi bran, and that can cost, you know, like £15 a bag, which will last you only for a few months. So it is quite pricey. The other thing with bokashi is that actually you're only creating the first stage of breaking down. So after 2 weeks, once your bin is completely full, you often need 2 bokashi bins, because after 2 weeks you leave it to rest for 2 weeks for the bacteria to fully take over what's in there, and then you have this kind of big block of bokashi, of vegetable peelings that you can bury somewhere. So it tends to be that it needs another composting side to it. So basically you can bury it in the garden, a friend's garden maybe, but otherwise you're kind of stuck with a big lump, which is a bit tricky for people living in small spaces. So negatives, positives, and then wormeries, negatives and positives. You can compost, worms will eat a little bit of cooked food, like a little bit of rice and a little bit of bread, but I wouldn't give them too much. So it's mainly just for like vegetable peeling scraps. So you can't compost everything, is a negative. Another negative is that it is very, very, they can be very expensive to buy. If you buy them, they can be like over £100. The other negative, which I actually think is a positive, is that you have to use worms, because I think worms are great. I love them in the garden. I always try and save them. But positives, they don't smell. Worms don't smell. They're actually, considering they live in mud, pretty clean creatures. It doesn't smell. They're really inexpensive. You never have to buy anything else. As long as you keep your worms happy, they will multiply, and you can even probably give some to a friend or put some out in the garden. So it's very, very cheap and easy to use. So they are the negatives and positives of bokashi and wormeries. And Joe is, and the compost
At home.
at home. Yes. So thank you very much for tuning in. This is what we do at Omved, and I hope that we've inspired you to do something similar at home.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We tried to break it down into 3 different levels, because we are aware that everyone's situation is different and what we have, our abilities are different. So there's a personal level, which Vicky has guided us through. There's wormeries, bokashis, hot compost, regular compost, and there's a community level. And this is something I feel strongly about, especially living in a place where not everyone has access to green space, right? So even if you do have a wormery, what are you going to do with the soil that's produced, right? So something that I've done in the past is ask a neighbor who's an enthusiastic gardener and composter if they can take some of my food scraps. Another thing is check if your borough has a food waste pickup. They don't really highlight it across. If I didn't seek it out, I wouldn't know that that happened. And another thing I've done in the past is London in particular has a huge density of community gardens. They always need compost. It's black gold, it's magic, it's soil, it's what makes plants grow. And they can also take your raw food scraps, your completed bokashi, or the waste from your wormery. And then finally, on a city and political level, you could join a campaign, you can contact your councillor, you can be the squeaky wheel, you can rally your neighbors. You know, I'm aware that we all can't do all of these things all the time because we have other things to do, but hopefully there's something that meets your needs at one of these levels and where you can participate. That's it for me.
Wow. What an amazing opportunity and toolkit. And thank you guys for really taking us through the ins and outs of composting and how to do this in the cities that we live in. There is some questions coming in, and I'm hoping you guys can get in there after this and answer a couple of the questions. There's a couple in there that maybe you can jump in. And there was a lot going on around Bakashi and different things, which is great. Always good to get those questions out. And I think, you know, as you were saying, Sonia, it's also sometimes reaching out to your neighbors. This is something that you can learn from others around you as well. But there's lots of information there. Well, thank you.